In New York City, the life of a glamorous billionaire crumbles after a tragic accident that leaves him amputated and emotionally destroyed. Isolated in his mansion, he sinks into pain and loneliness until a young housekeeper, driven by empathy and determination, challenges his apathy with a simple gesture, believing that he can still rise again. Between rehabilitation, public challenges, and building a joint legacy, they discover that true wealth lies in overcoming adversity, making a positive impact, and the love that blossoms from the most unlikely connections. A story of new beginnings, courage, and the transformative power of humanity. The sun was setting over New York City, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold that reflected off the windows of Ethan Blackwood's imposing office. From the 40th floor of his corporate empire, he contemplated the city he had conquered at the age of 35. His green eyes scanned the urban landscape like a king admiring his kingdom, while his fingers absent-mindedly drummed on the Italian marble desk. "Mr. Blackwood," his secretary's voice echoed through the intercom. "Miss Taylor is here to confirm the details of your engagement dinner." Ethan smiled, adjusting his Italian silk tie in front of the window's reflection. Olivia Taylor, his future wife, was the embodiment of everything he had always aspired to: beauty, refinement, and impeccable social connections. The marriage would be the pinnacle of his social ascent, the cherry on top of a meticulously planned life. "Send her in, Margaret," he replied, turning to greet his fiancée with a practiced smile. Olivia entered like a gust of perfumed wind, her Chanel dress flowing gracefully. Her Louboutin heels marked a determined rhythm on the marble floor as she approached with a radiant smile. "Darling," she greeted him with 2 kisses on the cheek, "we need to finalize some details. The plaza is confirmed for 300 guests, but we need to decide on the decorations. I was thinking of something classic, with white orchids and—" Ethan listened only partially, automatically agreeing with each suggestion. His mind was already on the cocktail party he would host later in his penthouse, where important executives would sign million-dollar contracts. This was how his life worked, one grand event after another, each more spectacular than the last. "And what about the weekend in the Hamptons?" Olivia asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Is the yacht ready?" "Of course," replied Ethan, picking up his Ferrari keys from the desk. "We'll leave on Friday. I've invited the Vanderbilts and the Astors. It will be a memorable weekend." Ethan's life was a succession of perfectly orchestrated moments. Since leaving his hometown in upstate New York, every step had been calculated with surgical precision. He had started as an intern at an investment bank and, in less than a decade, had built his own financial empire. Now, at 35, he was considered the golden boy of New York, the man who turned everything he touched into gold. That night, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Ethan circulated among his guests like a conductor leading an orchestra. Each conversation, each handshake, each toast was a perfectly executed note in his social symphony. Dom Perignon. Champagne flowed like water, while contracts were signed and alliances were forged. Among the guests, a discreet figure caught his attention. She was one of the newly hired staff for the house, a young woman of simple appearance, who moved silently among the guests serving canapés. There was something in her eyes, a quiet dignity that contrasted with the atmosphere of ostentation. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with his own interest. "Sofia Hernandez, sir," she replied with an accent that betrayed her Latina origins. "I started today." Ethan nodded distractedly, already being pulled away by another group of guests. However, something about that brief encounter remained etched in his memory, like a dissonant note in his perfectly tuned melody. The night progressed, and from the top of his penthouse, Ethan observed New York City glittering. Olivia had left earlier, citing commitments the following morning. The last guests were saying goodbye, leaving behind the echo of laughter and promises of new business deals. Alone, Ethan poured himself another glass of champagne. In a few days, he would sign the biggest contract of his career, marry the perfect woman, and definitively consolidate his position in New York's high society. His life was exactly as he had planned, a perfect reflection of success and power. As the staff began to discreetly clean up, he picked up his Ferrari keys. There was a party at an exclusive club in the meatpacking district, and he didn't want to miss the opportunity to celebrate another night of triumph. What Ethan didn't know was that fate was about to completely rewrite the script of his perfect life. The New York night was especially humid that autumn day. Ethan drove his Ferrari through the winding streets of the meatpacking district, the roar of the sports car engine echoing between the historic buildings. His mind wandered between the signed contracts and wedding plans, while raindrops began to dot the windshield. The club was packed when he arrived. More smiles, more champagne, more displays of power and influence. However, for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt an inexplicable emptiness. The image of the new employee, Sophia, with her serene and dignified eyes, kept returning to his mind like a silent counterpoint to all that excess. "Ethan, my man," the strident voice of Jack, one of his partners, cut through his thoughts. "We need to celebrate. The contract with the Chinese is practically closed." The hours dragged on in a succession of toasts and superficial conversations. When he finally decided to leave, dawn was already approaching. The rain had intensified, transforming the streets of New York into liquid mirrors that reflected the city lights. It was at this moment that everything changed. A poorly calculated turn, the wet asphalt, a sudden movement of the steering wheel. The Ferrari skidded, spinning out of control. The world around Ethan transformed into a blur of lights and metallic sounds until everything went dark. The awakening was slow and painful. The aseptic white of the hospital assaulted his eyes, while distant voices discussed in medical terms that he didn't fully understand. The first clear sensation was absence, a void where there should have been movement and feeling. "Mr. Blackwood," the doctor's grave voice finally gained clarity. "We did everything in our power, but the injuries were very severe. We had to perform bilateral amputation to save your life." The words fell on him like a sentence. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to process the information. His entire world, built on an image of perfection and control, was crumbling in a matter of seconds. The following days were a blur of pain, medication, and protocol visits. Olivia appeared regularly, but her eyes betrayed an increasingly evident discomfort. She talked about postponing the wedding, about the need to give it time. Her words, sounding increasingly distant and empty. In his mansion, where he was transferred after a few weeks, Ethan completely isolated himself. The mirrors were covered. He couldn't bear to see his own reflection. The phones were kept off, and the curtains remained closed. His luxury fortress had transformed into a voluntary prison. It was during this period that Sophia, the Latina employee, began to stand out. While other employees kept their distance, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, she performed her tasks with a disconcerting naturalness. There was no pity in her gaze, only a calm determination that somehow irritated and intrigued Ethan. One particularly difficult morning, when frustration led him to knock over a breakfast tray, he waited for looks of censure or pity. Instead, Sophia simply began to clean up the mess, casually commenting, "You know, Mr. Blackwood, sometimes breaking things is part of the reconstruction process." Ethan stared at her, surprised by her boldness. "And what do you know about reconstruction?" "More than you imagine," she replied without averting her gaze. "Not all battles are visible to the eyes." That brief exchange of words echoed in Ethan's mind throughout the day. There was something in the simplicity and honesty of that woman that contrasted drastically with the artificial world in which he had always lived. At night, alone in his room, Ethan received a message from Olivia. In carefully chosen words, she explained that she didn't feel capable of dealing with the situation and that it would be better to go separate ways. The blow, though expected, was no less painful. That night, Ethan's cries of frustration echoed through the mansion. Objects were broken, tears were shed, and when silence finally returned, it was Sophia who appeared with a cup of tea and a simple, "Sometimes, Mr. Blackwood, we need to accept." The end of one chapter for another to begin. The routine in the Blackwood mansion had transformed into a silent ritual. Mornings dragged on between painful physiotherapy sessions and moments of deep introspection. Ethan, once known for his magnetic presence, now retreated more and more into his library, taking refuge among books he had never had time to read. Sophia, in turn, began to develop her own routine around her employer's needs. A keen observer, she noticed that Ethan barely touched the elaborate breakfast that the other staff prepared. One morning, she surprised him with homemade empanadas and coffee prepared in a traditional Latin American style. "What's this?" he asked, intrigued by the different aroma that invaded the room. "A little piece of my homeland," she replied, adjusting the tray on the reading table. "Sometimes we need new flavors to awaken our senses." To his own surprise, Ethan found himself enjoying not only the food, but also the simplicity of that gesture. It was the first time in weeks that he felt true pleasure in something. "Where did you learn to make this?" he asked, savoring the still warm empanada. Sophia sat in a nearby armchair, something she would never have dared to do weeks ago. "From my grandmother in Puerto Rico. She always said that food is more than sustenance, it's affection, it's memory, it's healing." Gradually, the mornings in the library became more than just a refuge. They transformed into moments of mutual discovery. Ethan began to take an interest in Sophia's story, a young woman who had left Puerto Rico in search of opportunities in the United States, carrying with her only a suitcase of dreams and the determination to help her family. "My brother Miguel," she told him one day, "was born with a condition that affected his movements. The doctors said he would never walk, but my mother never accepted that diagnosis. She worked 3 jobs to pay for treatments. Today, he not only walks but dances salsa better than most people." The story touched Ethan deeply. "How did he manage?" "One step at a time," Sophia replied, her eyes shining with the memory. "And, most importantly, never letting his condition define who he was." Sophia's words planted a seed of change in Ethan. Slowly, he began to allow himself small challenges. First, he agreed to remove the cloths covering the mirrors. Then he allowed the curtains to be opened, letting natural light flood the rooms. One day, while watching Sophia organize the books, Ethan noticed something different about her hands. Small cuts and grease stains. "What happened to your hands?" he asked, genuinely concerned. Sophia hesitated for a moment before answering. "I've been studying about prosthetics in my spare time. In the basement of the mansion, I set up a small workshop. I know it sounds crazy, but you've been doing this. Why?" interrupted Ethan, a mixture of surprise and curiosity in his voice. "Because I believe everyone deserves a second chance," she replied, holding his gaze. "Including you, Mr. Blackwood." That revelation triggered a series of emotions in Ethan. The idea that someone, especially someone he barely knew months ago, would dedicate so much effort for his sake was disconcerting. More than that, it was transformative. That night after Sophia had retired, Ethan remained awake, reflecting on how his life had changed. The people he considered fundamental had disappeared, while a simple employee demonstrated a dedication he had never experienced. He picked up his tablet and for the first time in months began researching prosthetics and rehabilitation. Hours passed as he delved into the subject, discovering stories of overcoming and possibilities he had never considered. The next morning, when Sophia brought the coffee, she found Ethan with dark circles under his eyes, but with a different gleam in his gaze. "Show me your workshop," he said, determined. "I want to see what you've been doing." The smile that illuminated Sophia's face at that moment was like a ray of sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. It was the beginning of something new, an unlikely partnership that was beginning to form between the American billionaire and the Puerto Rican immigrant, united by a purpose greater than their social differences. The basement of the Blackwood mansion, once a forgotten space full of dusty antiques, had transformed into something extraordinary. When Sophia turned on the lights, Ethan was impressed with what he saw. On improvised tables, there were dozens of prosthetic prototypes at different stages of development. The walls were covered with technical drawings and notes in Spanish and English. "It's not much," said Sophia, suddenly aware of her employer's appraising look, "but each piece here represents a different possibility." Ethan observed everything with growing fascination. In one corner, there was a shelf full of books on anatomy, biomechanical engineering, and prosthetic design. Some were marked with colorful post-its, others had dog-eared pages from frequent use. "How did you manage to learn all this?" he asked, picking up one of the more elaborate prototypes. "Internet mainly," she replied, approaching to explain the mechanism. There are incredible online communities of people sharing knowledge about low-cost prosthetics. I learned a lot from makers all over the world, and of course the experience with my brother Miguel taught me a lot about adaptability and persistence. As Sophia explained the technical details of each project, Ethan noticed a subtle change in his own perspective. Her dedication was not only impressive, it was inspiring. Here was someone who, even with limited resources, found ways to create possibilities for others. "This one," said Sophia, showing a specific prototype, "was inspired by your case. It's still far from ideal, but the idea is to create something that allows for more natural movements," and she continued explaining, but Ethan was no longer listening. His mind was focused on the revelation that, while he was sinking into self-pity, Sophia was dedicating her nights to trying to help him. "Why do you care so much?" he interrupted, his voice laden with emotion. Sophia paused for a moment, considering the question. "You know, Mr. Blackwood, when my brother was in his most difficult moments, a nurse said something I never forgot. The true disability is not in the body, but in the inability to see possibilities. You have so much potential, so much capacity to make a difference. It would be a shame to let that go to waste." Her words hit Ethan like a bolt of clarity. For the first time since the accident, he began to glimpse a purpose beyond his own pain. "Teach me," he said, surprising them both. "I want to learn about all of this. I want to understand how it works. I want to participate." Sophia's smile lit up the basement. "We can start right now, but I warn you, I'm a demanding teacher." In the weeks that followed, the basement became the center of their universe. Ethan immersed himself in his studies with the same determination he once dedicated to business. Sophia, in turn, proved to be a patient and passionate mentor. The other employees of the mansion began to notice the changes. Ethan no longer isolated himself as much, and his eyes had regained some of their lost sparkle. Sometimes laughter could be heard coming from the basement, something unthinkable months ago. During one of these work sessions, while trying to adjust a particularly complex mechanism, their hands accidentally touched. The moment was brief but charged with electricity. Both pretended not to notice, but something had subtly changed in the dynamic between them. "I think we've got it," said Sophia, breaking the awkward silence. "This model should allow for more fluid knee movement." Ethan nodded, still distracted by the previous moment. "Sophia, have you ever thought about doing this professionally? You have incredible talent." "I have thought about it," she admitted, "but training in biomedical engineering is expensive, and my family in Puerto Rico depends on my financial help. For now, this is my dream laboratory." That conversation planted an idea in Ethan's mind. As he watched Sophia work, he began to formulate a plan. His financial empire, which once served only to feed his vanity, could have a greater purpose. That night, after Sophia had retired, Ethan remained in the basement, observing the prototypes and drawings. He picked up his laptop and began researching scholarship programs and investments in assistive technology. The fortune he had accumulated could be the catalyst to transform Sophia's basement dreams into reality. The next day, when she arrived for another work session, she found Ethan as excited as she hadn't seen him in a long time. "I have a proposal for you," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "But first, I need you to help me with something even more important. I want to start my rehabilitation. For real this time." The following weeks transformed the Blackwood mansion into an improvised rehabilitation center. Ethan's determination surprised even his physiotherapist, Dr. Harris, who noticed a radical change in his patient's attitude. "You're different, Ethan," the doctor commented during a particularly intense session. "A few weeks ago, I could barely convince you to do the basic exercises. Now, I need to ask you to slow down." Ethan smiled, concentrating on maintaining his balance on the parallel bars. Sweat ran down his face, but there was determination in his eyes. Sophia was there, as always, closely observing and taking notes that she would later use to adjust the prosthetics they were developing together. "I have good motivation, Doctor," Ethan replied, casting a quick glance in Sophia's direction, who pretended not to notice. although a slight blush colored her cheeks. The nights in the workshop now alternated between developing prosthetics and extra training sessions. Sophia had installed support bars and basic equipment, transforming a corner of the basement into an exercise area. Ethan discovered that the manual work with the prosthetics not only helped him better understand his own recovery process, but also served as a form of therapy. It was during one of these nights that the past knocked on the mansion's door. Olivia Taylor, elegant as always, appeared without warning. "Ethan, darling," her voice echoed through the entrance hall, startling everyone present. "It's been so long." Sophia, who was coming down the stairs at that moment, froze at the sight of her employer's ex-fiancé. Olivia was everything she wasn't. Sophisticated, wealthy, perfectly suited to Ethan's world. For a moment, she felt out of place in her simple uniform with hands stained with grease. Ethan emerged from his study, leaning on his new experimental prosthetic. The contrast between the Ethan that Olivia had abandoned and the man who now presented himself was notable. Although still in the process of adaptation, his posture conveyed a different, more authentic confidence. "Olivia," he replied, his voice neutral. "What brings you here?" "Oh, darling, I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, approaching in her Jimmy Choo heels. "I made a terrible mistake. I was scared, confused, but now I see that our love is greater than any obstacle." Sophia felt her heart tighten. Silently, she began to retreat towards the basement, her safe haven. Before she could disappear completely, she heard Ethan's voice. "Sophia, please stay. We have that calibration test to do, remember?" The request surprised both Sophia and Olivia, who finally noticed the employee's presence. Her eyes scanned Sophia from head to toe, a condescending smile playing on her lips. "Oh, you still work here? What admirable dedication," Olivia commented, her tone making clear what she thought about the closeness between employer and employee. "Sophia doesn't just work here," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "She's my partner in a project that will change many people's lives." Olivia's expression oscillated between surprise and displeasure. "Project? Darling, you don't need to occupy yourself with that. We can resume our life from before. I have so many plans for us. The house in the Hamptons is ready. We can—" "The life from before is over, Olivia," Ethan interrupted, his voice soft but decisive. "And I'm grateful for that. For the first time, I'm building something that has true meaning." At that moment, as if to emphasize his words, Ethan walked over to Sophia, his step still not entirely steady, but determined. "Shall we? We have a lot of work ahead of us." Olivia watched, stunned, as Ethan and Sophia went down to the basement, together. The intimacy between them was palpable, a connection that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship. In the basement, Sophia remained silent for a few minutes, adjusting tools that didn't need adjusting. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "She's part of your world, your previous life." Ethan approached, gently touching her arm. "The thing is, Sophia, that world, that life, no longer interests me. You helped me discover a greater purpose, something real, and there's no going back after that." The look they exchanged was loaded with unspoken meanings. There was a universe of possibilities unfolding between them, far beyond prosthetics and rehabilitation. It was the beginning of something new, something that neither of them had planned, but which seemed increasingly inevitable. News of Olivia's visit spread quickly through New York's social circles. The tabloids, which had been speculating for months about the whereabouts of the once omnipresent Ethan Blackwood, began to mention his name again. This time, however, the tone was different. Rumors about his strange seclusion and his unlikely partnership with a Puerto Rican employee began to circulate. Ethan, focused on his recovery and the development of prosthetics with Sophia, initially ignored the comments. However, a call from his former partner, Jack, changed everything. "Ethan, my friend, we need to talk," Jack said, his tone revealing concern. "The investors are restless. We need to do something to calm things down. How about a presentation? Show that you're in control, that you're still the same." "But I'm not the same, Jack," Ethan interrupted. Exactly why. We need to manage this new situation. And there's more. I heard you've been developing some kind of prosthetics project. Why don't we take advantage of the opportunity? We can organize an event, invite the press, show your new venture. It'll be perfect for your image. Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to continue his discreet work with Sophia, protecting that safe space they had created. But another part knew that if they really wanted to make a difference, they would need support and investments. When he mentioned the idea to Sophia, he noticed her immediate apprehension. I don't know, Ethan, she said, biting her lower lip. The prototypes aren't ready for a public presentation yet. We need more tests, more adjustments. But think of the possibilities, he argued enthusiastically. With adequate investment, we could develop so much more. Help more people, like your brother Miguel. The mention of her brother touched Sophia deeply. She knew Ethan was right. They needed to think bigger. She agreed to the presentation, but on one condition. They would do it their way, keeping the focus on people, not profits. The following weeks were of intense preparation. The date was set. They would present the project to a select group of investors and journalists at the auditorium of Ethan's company. Sophia worked tirelessly on the final adjustments to the prosthetics, while Ethan dedicated himself to perfecting his movements. On the eve of the presentation, while doing the final tests in the basement, Sophia noticed something different in Ethan's gaze. Are you nervous? She asked, adjusting a screw on the prosthetic. Not for the reason you think, he replied, thoughtful. Tomorrow, for the first time since the accident, I'm going to present myself publicly. But that's not what worries me. It's... He hesitated, searching for the right words. It's the possibility of disappointing you. Sophia stopped what she was doing, surprised by the confession. Disappoint me? What do you mean? You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. You transformed this basement into a laboratory of possibilities. You taught me to see beyond limitations. Ethan took a deep breath. And tomorrow, when I go up on that stage, I want to show the world that your faith in me wasn't in vain. Sophia felt her eyes fill with tears. Without thinking, she took Ethan's hand in hers. You've already shown me that every day for the past few months. What happens tomorrow is just a detail. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Robert, the butler, announcing that the final arrangements for tomorrow's event were ready. Quickly, Sophia released Ethan's hand and turned her attention back to the tools. I think everything's ready, she said, her voice slightly trembling. Just don't forget what we agreed on. When you feel the click in the right knee, you need to redistribute your weight before taking the next step. Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. In the brief moment when their hands touched, he had felt something that no prosthetic could reproduce, the sensation of being complete. That night, neither of them could sleep properly. Sophia tossed and turned in her small bed in the staff quarters, mentally reviewing every technical detail. Ethan, in his master bedroom, alternated between rehearsing his speech and thinking about the soft touch of Sophia's hands. Morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The auditorium was packed. Former partners, potential investors, journalists, and even Olivia, who had appeared uninvited, occupying a seat in the front row. Backstage, Sophia made the final adjustments to the prosthetics, her hands slightly trembling. Remember, you're not alone in this, she whispered, before Ethan went up on stage. The auditorium fell completely silent when Ethan stepped onto the stage. Under the intense lights, he could distinguish familiar faces, old partners, friends from his social circle, journalists eager for a sensational story. Olivia, in the front row, displayed a rehearsed smile, as if her presence was a demonstration of unconditional support. Good afternoon, everyone, Ethan began, his voice firm despite his nervousness. Many of you knew me in a previous life. The Ethan Blackwood of luxurious parties, million-dollar negotiations, magazine covers. He paused strategically, his eyes finding Sophia's backstage. She nodded slightly, giving him courage to continue. That man no longer exists, and today, for the first time, I'm grateful for that. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the speech they expected to hear. In recent months, I've learned that there's a fundamental difference between surviving and living. Surviving is continuing to breathe, keeping up appearances, following a predetermined script. Living is discovering purpose even in the most challenging circumstances. Ethan began to walk across the stage, his movement still not entirely fluid, but determined. Each step was a demonstration of the technology he and Sophia had developed. The project I present today was born in a basement, among improvised tools and ambitious dreams. It was born from the calloused hands of someone who saw possibilities where I only saw limitations. At this moment, he gestured for Sophia to come on stage. There was a moment of hesitation. They hadn't planned this. Sophia, still in her simple work uniform, emerged timidly from the wings. "This is Sophia Hernandez," Ethan introduced, evident pride in his voice. "A Puerto Rican immigrant who transformed the basement of my mansion into a laboratory of hope. Someone who, without resources or recognition, dedicated herself to developing accessible assistive technology." Sophia blushed intensely under the audience's gazes. Olivia, in the front row, uncomfortably adjusted herself in her chair. "Together, we've developed a prosthetic system that combines efficiency and accessibility. But more than that, we've developed a vision of a future where assistive technology is not a privilege but a right." Ethan then did something unexpected. He approached a table that was on the stage and climbed onto it, demonstrating the balance and mobility that the prosthetics provided. "Look, I'm not here to impress you with acrobatics. I'm here to show that each small achievement, each step taken, represents a victory over the limitations that life imposes on us." The auditorium was completely engaged. Even the most skeptical journalists had abandoned their expressions of disdain. "But something happened that wasn't in the plans," Ethan continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "During this journey, I discovered that the true prosthetics are not these pieces of metal and polymers. They are the dreams that move us, the purpose that guides us, and..." His eyes met Sophia's. "The love that transforms us." The silence in the auditorium was palpable. Sophia felt her heart race, while Olivia abruptly rose from her chair. "That's why I'm not here today just to present an assistive technology project. I'm here to announce the creation of the New Steps Foundation, an organization dedicated to making assistive technology accessible to all who need it." Applause began to echo through the auditorium. Ethan raised his hand, asking for silence. "And I want to invite Sophia Hernandez not only to be the Director of Technological Development for the Foundation, but also..." He turned to her, completely ignoring the audience now, "to be my partner in every sense, if you'll accept." The auditorium exploded in comments and camera flashes. Olivia hurriedly left, her heels echoing on the floor. But for Ethan and Sophia, the world had been reduced to that moment, that stage, that exchange of glances that said more than 1,000 words. The buzz in the auditorium continued, but Ethan and Sophia had taken refuge in a small room backstage. The silence between them was charged with emotion and expectation. Sophia was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few minutes. "Did you plan this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, taking her hands in his. "The announcement of the foundation, yes, the rest..." He paused, searching for the right words. "The rest was my heart speaking louder than my reason. For the first time in my life, I don't regret that." Sophia felt tears forming in her eyes. "But Ethan, do you realize what this means? The newspapers, society, your investors..." "I have an exact notion," he interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. "It means that I'm finally being true to myself and to everyone. Sophia, you taught me more than rehabilitation techniques. You showed me that real value isn't measured in dollars or social titles." At that moment, they were interrupted by Jack, who hurriedly entered the room. His face was red, and his expression oscillated between concern and excitement. "Ethan, it's incredible. The journalists are going crazy out there, and you won't believe it. 3 major investors have already expressed interest in the foundation, but..." He cast a hesitant glance at Sophia. "Maybe we should better manage the issue of, well, your relationship." "There's nothing to manage, Jack," Ethan replied, his voice calm but decisive. Sophia will be the director of technological development on her own merit and knowledge. And as for our personal relationship, that's between us, Jack sighed, defeated. Fine, but we need an official statement, something to calm the press. And the investors want details about the technical project. Can we schedule a meeting for tomorrow? Sophia interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself. We can meet tomorrow at the mansion. I have all the projects documented and can present our development plan. Ethan looked at her with pride. This was the Sophia he knew, determined, professional, focused on what really mattered. After Jack left, Sophia began to pace nervously around the room. Ethan, I haven't even answered your question yet. He approached, gently touching her face. You didn't need to answer with words. Your eyes already said everything on that stage. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Robert, the butler, with an urgent envelope. Miss Sophia, this just arrived for you. Sophia opened the envelope with trembling hands. Her eyes quickly scanned the content before filling with tears. It's from Miguel, my brother, she explained. Her voice choked with emotion. He saw the presentation on the internet. He's saying that... She paused to control her emotion. That he finally understands why I insisted so much on coming to New York. And that he can't wait to meet the man who made me believe in miracles. Ethan felt his heart expand. Then we need to bring him here. He can be our first case study at the foundation. Ethan, I can't accept. It's not charity, Sophia, he gently interrupted. It's an investment in research and development. Besides, he smiled, I need to impress my future brother-in-law, don't I? The rest of the day passed like a whirlwind. Improvised meetings, endless phone calls, journalists trying to get exclusives. But at the end of the afternoon, when they finally returned to the mansion, something had fundamentally changed. Sophia didn't return to her staff bedroom. Instead, they spent the night in the library, planning not only the future of the foundation, but their future together. Between cups of coffee and prosthetic designs, they discovered that their dreams complemented each other perfectly. You know what's funny? Sophia commented while sketching a new design. I spent so much time trying to fix your legs when in reality you were fixing my heart. Ethan laughed, pulling her close. I think we fixed each other, and now we can fix the world one step at a time. John F. Kennedy Airport was bustling that spring morning. Sophia couldn't keep still, alternating between nervous checks of the flight board and unnecessary adjustments to her outfit. Ethan, by her side, watched her restlessness with an affectionate smile. He should be arriving soon, she said for the 10th time, checking the time on her phone again. Do you think he'll recognize his big sister all dressed up like this? Ethan took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Sophia, you look beautiful, and I'm sure Miguel is just as anxious as you are. The last 3 months had been intense. The New Steps Foundation had officially established itself, occupying a historic building in the heart of Manhattan. The old basement of the mansion had been transformed into a museum that told the story of the project, preserving the improvised tools and the first prototypes as a symbol that great achievements can have humble beginnings. The news that the foundation's first beneficiary would be Sophia's brother generated controversial headlines. Some questioned the nepotism, others celebrated the poetic justice of the situation. But Sophia and Ethan remained firm in their decision. Flight 722 from San Juan has just landed, announced the mechanical voice over the loudspeaker. Sophia squeezed Ethan's hand harder. The following minutes seemed to drag on forever, until finally, among the passengers emerging from the arrival, Gate Miguel appeared. The resemblance to Sophia was striking. The same expressive eyes, the same warm smile. He walked with some difficulty, supported by crutches, but his face radiated contagious joy. "Sis!" he exclaimed in Spanish, opening his arms. Sophia ran towards him, tears freely running down her face. The siblings' embrace was long and emotional, years of longing and love condensed into one moment. "Let me introduce you to someone," Sophia finally said, pulling Ethan by the hand. "Miguel, this is Ethan." Miguel studied the American for a moment, before breaking into an even bigger smile. "So this is the man who stole my stubborn sister's heart?" Ethan, who had dedicated himself to learning Spanish in recent months, replied with a heavy accent, "Actually, it was she who stole mine." The journey to the mansion was filled with animated conversations, with Miguel telling childhood stories that made Sophia blush and laugh at the same time. Ethan observed the siblings' interaction with fascination, noticing in Miguel's gestures and expressions the same inner strength that had attracted him to Sophia. In the days that followed, Miguel became not only the Foundation's first patient, but also a valuable consultant. His personal experience with different types of prosthetics and treatments brought important perspectives to the project. "You know what's most incredible?" he commented one night during dinner at the mansion. "It's not the prosthetics themselves, but what you're doing with them. You're giving people back more than mobility. You're giving back dignity." Sophia, who was serving her famous arroz con gandules, which had become Ethan's favorite dish, paused for a moment, emotional. "It all started with you, Miguel. It was seeing your struggle that I learned to never give up." No, Ethan intervened, raising his glass. "It started with love. A sister's love for her brother, which transformed into a love for helping others, which in turn," he looked tenderly at Sophia, "taught me to truly love." The Foundation was growing rapidly. What had begun as a personal project had transformed into a revolution in the field of assistive technology. Companies from all over the world sought partnerships, and success stories multiplied. But for Sophia and Ethan, the greatest success was seeing Miguel progressing each day. His physiotherapy sessions became family events, with the three celebrating every small advance. One afternoon, as they watched Miguel testing his new prosthetic in the mansion's garden, Ethan whispered in Sophia's ear, "Remember when you told me that everyone deserves a second chance?" Sophia nodded, leaning back against his chest. "You didn't. Just give me a second chance," he continued. "You gave me a lifetime of chances to make a difference. And now, seeing your brother here, I realize that the circle is coming full." Miguel waved to them, taking his first independent steps with the new prosthetic. His smile illuminated the entire garden. The garden of the Blackwood mansion had never looked so beautiful. Flowers of all colors decorated the space, while delicate lanterns hung between the trees, ready to illuminate the approaching night. In the center of the garden, a small altar had been set up, intertwined with white roses and orchids. Sophia observed the preparations through the window of the master bedroom, now her bedroom, while a makeup artist gave the final touches to her face. Her mother, who had come from Puerto Rico for the wedding, adjusted the veil with hands trembling with emotion. "Who would have thought, my daughter," Doña Carmencita murmured in Spanish, that determined girl who left for New York would fulfill so many dreams?" Sophia smiled, holding her mother's hands. "The biggest dream is here, Mum. Seeing our family reunited, seeing Miguel walking again." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Miguel, impeccable in his best man suit, now walking with ease thanks to the prosthetic developed by the Foundation. "Can I come in?" "The groom is almost having an anxiety attack downstairs," he joked, but his eyes watered at the sight of his sister in her wedding dress. "Sophia, you look—" "Don't make me cry, Miguel," she warned, gently fanning her face to preserve her makeup. "How's Ethan?" "Nervous, emotional, and absurdly happy," Miguel replied with a smile. "Oh, and he asked me to give you this." Miguel handed a small envelope to his sister. Inside was a piece of the graph paper they used to draw prototypes in the basement. On it, Ethan had written in Spanish, with his still somewhat hesitant handwriting, "My love, in a few minutes, I'll be waiting for you at the altar. But before that, I want you to know that you are the greatest project of my life. Not the prosthetics, not the Foundation, but the love we've built. You taught me that true miracles don't happen in laboratories or operating rooms, but in people's hearts. With all my love, Ethan." Sophia carefully folded the paper, keeping it close to her heart. In the garden, guests were already beginning to settle in. It was an intimate ceremony, only with close family and friends. Among them were several beneficiaries of the Foundation, each with their own story of overcoming. Dr. Harris, who had accompanied Ethan's entire journey since the accident, occupied a special place in the front row. Next to him, Jack, who had initially resisted his friend's transformation, but who was now one of the Foundation's biggest enthusiasts. When the music began to play, Miguel offered his arm to his sister. On the way to the altar, Sophia saw smiling faces and emotional eyes. She saw Robert, the butler, discreetly wiping away a tear. She saw the mansion staff, who had ceased to be just employees to become part of a large family. Ethan waited for her under the altar, his green eyes shining with emotion. He had insisted on standing throughout the ceremony, using the prosthetic they had developed together. Every step he had taken to get there was a testimony to their shared journey. The officiant, a friend of Sophia's family, conducted the ceremony in Spanish and English, symbolizing the union not just of two people, but of two cultures, two stories, two worlds that had met in the most unlikely way. Love, he said, is like a prosthetic for the soul. It completes us, allows us to walk further, helps us overcome limitations we thought were insurmountable. When it came time for the vows, Ethan surprised everyone by speaking in fluent Spanish. "Sophia, you found me when I was broken and helped me rebuild not just my body but my soul. You taught me that our limitations are just the beginning of our possibilities. I promise to spend the rest of my life repaying this miracle, not just to you, but to everyone who crosses our path." Sophia, with tears in her eyes, responded in English, "Ethan, you say I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. We found in each other not just love, but a greater purpose. I promise to continue this journey by your side, building not just prosthetics, but bridges between dreams and reality." When they were declared husband and wife, the sun was beginning to set on the New York horizon, painting the sky with the same colors that had witnessed their first encounter at that party so long ago. The celebration that followed was a perfect blend of American elegance and Puerto Rican warmth. Miguel surprised everyone by dancing salsa with ease, proving that there were no limits for those who refused to accept limitations. Later, when the night was already late, Ethan and Sophia escaped to the basement, now transformed into a museum. There, among the first prototypes and improvised tools, they shared a moment of reflection. "You know what's most incredible?" Sophia said, touching one of the old prosthetics. "The true miracle wasn't the technological innovations or the success of the foundation. It was discovering that love can transform a basement into a laboratory of dreams, a fall into an ascent, and two strangers into soulmates." Ethan pulled her close, his eyes reflecting all the love in the world. "No, my love, the true miracle is that this is just the beginning of our story."